I remember being in high school in ninth grade once and coming back to the house and sitting down in the living room and just crying and being so upset and just feeling like it was the end of the world. The pressure was so much. And my dad walked into the living room and he said, "Peter, what's wrong?" And I said, "Dad, I'm the most miserable person in the world. I'm never going to survive high school." And I was just so stressed out. And I remember at Chadwick just being there being so much pressure with grades and expectations and college and just thinking, what am I going to do with my life? And what if things don't work out? And what if I don't find a date for prom? And it was just so much. And now I'm standing up here 14 years later, and I'm just thinking, how did that happen? I'm just kind of curious, like on a finger scale of like 5 is you're really, really like stressed out right now, and 1 is like things are totally going swimmingly. Like if you could raise your hand on like a 1 to 5 scale on how stressed you are, I'm just curious. Well, don't talk about it, just raise your hand. I see a 10. I see a lot of 4s, some 2. All right, so I'd say like the average is probably like maybe like a 4, maybe a 3.5. So that's okay. So that's not too bad. That's decent. But it was really stressful. But I felt like I learned so much that. Especially now, I look back at Chadwick and I just feel like it was such a formative time and had a huge influence on me that helped set me up for the future, and that so many teachers invested so much in me, and I didn't even realize it at the time. I really learned to work hard, and I felt like the other area I really worked at was I found something I was passionate about. And that was one of the greatest gifts Chadwick gave me is, it helped me in college, it helped me in the rest of my life. I found that I was really passionate about writing. And I was a bad writer at Chadwick. I thought I was good, but I really was not. I was looking through my bedroom. I was at home where I grew up yesterday, and I was looking through some of the things I wrote, and here's like 2 sentences of something I wrote about my older sister. Katie's my older sister. Katie gets good grades. Everyone likes her. She's smart. She's good looking. She has a boyfriend, and she's nice. At least she could be a jerk. Then at least I'd have a chance. She does all this just to be mean to me, and that's why I hate her. So I'm not saying it was beautiful writing, but I did it a lot, and I started reading books about writing. I remember taking Terry Andrews' class and thinking, oh gosh, I want to be an author someday, and I thought, gosh, being a writer is probably the best job in the world. You get to, who wouldn't want to be able to just, you sit at a desk, you put some words together in an arrangement, and you send them out into the universe, and then sometimes they hit on something and they change the world and you get paid for it, and it's just this amazing thing that, wow, all I did was sit at a desk and put some words together. And I realized that I wanted to write nonfiction. It's not just that I like real things, but I feel like with fiction, you're constrained by what seems plausible. With nonfiction, the only requirement is that it's true. You're only constrained by the truth, and you can shed light on things. And I've seen laws change. I've seen people go to jail. I've seen people's lives transform all just because of something I wrote, and it's this amazing thing to be able to do. And early in my career after college, I quickly saw the power of telling a story. One issue I wrote about when I was a journalist in Idaho is I wrote a lot about homelessness. There was a big problem of people who are homeless who were freezing to death because there weren't many services for people who are homeless. So I did all these stories that mentioned all these statistics and all these, quoted all these experts about homelessness, and nobody cared. It was really sad. And then I said, okay, I've got to try a different approach. So I told a story about this woman named Dorothy and how she'd become homeless and how she died and what happened at her funeral and just the story of her life. And all these statistics and all these other stories that I told that had washed over people's heads when I told the story of this one woman named Dorothy and how it happened to her. Suddenly people cared, and the city changed how it handled homelessness, and it made a big difference in saving a lot of people's lives. And to me, this light went off, which was, wow, you can tell a story, and that can just change everything. Then after that, I moved to the Oregonian, and the way this book started was I was feeling kind of restless, and I was kind of eager for a big project, and my cousin called, Amanda, and she said, Peter, I've got this great idea for a book. There's this mountain, it's called K2. It's in Pakistan. It's the second tallest mountain in the world, and my friend just died on the mountain, and I want to find out what happened to him, and you should come with me, and we should write a book about it. And I said, no, that's a terrible idea. I'm not a mountaineer, and I wasn't sure I wanted to spend the next 3 years trekking around remote villages in Nepal that were technically off limits to journalists. And I really wasn't sure it would be smart for a gay Jewish American to go trekking through Taliban-infested regions of northern Pakistan that the U.S. Embassy had specifically told me to stay away from because of the terrorist threat. We didn't have a publisher. I'd had a comfortable job. I'd have to quit, and I really liked the job. And I'd be interviewing people that I honestly had no idea anyone really cared about because they had not been written about before. Writing this book sounded like a terrible, terrible idea. There was no way I was going to do it. But okay, Amanda, I told her, I'll do a little bit of research for you. And I looked into this story. And first I have to say, I love adventure stories. And the 2008 disaster on K2 was one of the most dramatic adventure stories I'd ever seen. I mean, you have life and death at the limit of human endurance and triumph and tragedy on a peak that's so lethal, most people consider it suicide. And I'm looking at photos of people, just before they lived or died or made some decision that would lead to lots of other people living and dying. And you see what people do when they've been broken by oxygen deprivation and exhaustion, and they have to get along with each other, and they don't like each other, and they're fighting, and they're in the same tent, and their lives depend on teamwork, and they just can't get it together. And the characters were just larger than life people. They're not the kind of people you bump into every day. It takes a unique personality to decide to climb up the world's deadliest mountain. I guess it takes a unique personality to interview those people in Pakistan as well. And they were difficult people. And they fought with each other, and they disagreed on what happened. And you would think you knew who they were when you're following the story. And then when things got really bad, they would reveal themselves to be somebody different. And it was a story that made me ask myself, and I thought it would make other people ask themselves who they are. Are you somebody that when things get bad, you go out and help your friends? When do you do that? Would you save the life of somebody and risk your life if you didn't know who they were, or if they were really poor, or if they spoke a different language from you, or were from a different ethnic group? When will you actually go out there and be a hero, and when will you try to just protect yourself? And I felt like this book asked those questions. So I thought, okay, there's a compelling story, there's great characters, but I still was not going to write the book. I just felt like there are other stories, there are other books that have larger than life characters and really compelling stories, and that there are lots of mountaineering books about people who are struggling up these fixed ropes to reach the top of the mountain, and it's a good story, but it's been done. And so what got me to do this book was that I realized that it illustrates a much more universal problem, a problem that we all face nearly every day, and it's actually a problem that I think we particularly face at Chadwick, which is, let me explain that. Among Sherpas, do people here know what a Sherpa is? Give me raise your hand if you have an idea of what a Sherpa is. Okay, maybe 20%. So Sherpas hold this nearly mythical status among mountaineers. They have this seemingly superhuman ability to go up and down mountains. They scout routes, they break trails, they fix ropes, they carry gear, they establish camps, they pitch tents, they escort climbers to the summit, they snap photos of people on the summit, they rescue climbers when they slip. But most of the climbers, or a lot of climbers, only have a vague idea of what a Sherpa is. And it's a big controversy over whether a Sherpa is a job description or whether it's an ethnic group. And it's not an easy answer. But a lot of Sherpas work as high altitude workers. And on mountains, Sherpa climbers, their job is to safely get their clients up and down a mountain. And they're the unsung heroes of some of the most famous adventure stories of all time. And in a lot of these accounts, their names aren't even included in the book or in the story. And that's got me thinking that history, it's usually told through the eyes of the kings and the Columbuses and the conquerors, not from the perspective of the help. And the K2 story and mountaineering stories in general show how this kind of omission can lead to a disaster. That when your life hangs from a knot, you need to know who tied it. You need to know whether it was tied correctly. When you're relying on a team to lead you up a mountain, you need to know whether the members of that team speak the same language and can communicate, whether they're business rivals, whether they're ethnic rivals, whether they can work together and will work together. And when you tell an incomplete story, when you tell a story that omits important people who are easily ignored, you fail to learn a lot, and what you fail to learn can contribute to a disaster. And you might not even know what the consequences of this omission are. And people will just keep repeating your errors and repeating your errors. And these were major issues on K2, and I feel like major issues of what I've written about. And so what really appealed to me about this book was that for the rest of us, I mean, I don't know how many K2 mountaineers are in this room, but I don't think they're that many. But for the rest of us, we're largely in the same situation as the climbers. You know, we all, in a metaphorical sense, hang from knots that other people have tied. We all have summits in our lives, and we're all surrounded by people we rarely notice. I mean, you think of that, the person who prepares your meal at the cafeteria, or the person who cleans up the amphitheater here when we're done. Or, you think the last mechanic who checked my plane before takeoff. For those of us who are not K2 mountaineers, this book dramatizes the fact that Sherpas are all around us and that we can't afford to ignore them, that there's Sherpas in every story and they need to be seen for whom they really are because our lives depend on them. And that struck me as a good reason to write a book. So I agreed. I really didn't know what I was doing when I started. I flew to Nepal and I had 2 books with me. One was titled How to Write a Book, and the second was How to Write a Book Proposal. And I'd done big investigative projects, but I was really scared because I had no idea what I was going to do if this project didn't work. And I was not a good start. I quickly learned that doing journalism in South Asia is not like doing it in the United States. Part of the problem was tracking people down. I arrived in Kathmandu, so Nepal is in South Asia, and Kathmandu is the major city there. And I got there and I thought, I'm just gonna look in the phone book and start calling people up and start interviewing them. And I learned that almost all Sherpas have the same name, one of 7 names. Sherpas traditionally who were born on Monday, they go by the name Dawa. It means Monday. If you're born on Tuesday, your name is Mingma. It means Tuesday. Wednesday's Lakpa, and it goes all the way up to Sunday. So you think, okay, they've got, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday as their first names, but I'm covered. I've got last names. No. Sherpas almost always use the name Sherpa for their last name. And it's a system that kind of works in a small village, because you can say, hey, I want to talk to Monday, who's the son of Monday and brothers with Tuesday. And it's small enough and it works, but then you go to a city and the system is dysfunctional. Phone books just have page after page of, Monday Sherpa, Dawa Sherpa. And most of the Sherpas live in the same neighborhoods. And even just gossiping about people have to provide these elaborate descriptions of the person they're trying to malign, which is kind of fun, I'll say. But and there are nicknames, but they're inconsistent and they're well guarded because names have this certain power. And so you're unlikely to have it told to you unless you're an insider. And so tracking down the right person was a major challenge when I first started this project. And then when I had an idea of where the person I was trying to reach was, there was the aspect of getting there. I think, you've done outdoor ed, you've probably been to kind of remote areas. But this was a new level of remoteness for me. Some villages didn't have phones or electricity or running water or antibiotics or petroleum or roads or metal or machinery. And the only way to get there was by backpacking. And when you got to a village, it had its own language, its own dialect that was only spoken in that village in a lot of instances. And it made the translation and interview process a lot of work. I would ask questions. I'd say, "How old are you?" And it would go through one translator to translate into Nepali. "How old are you?" And then another translator would translate it from Nepali into the local language. "How old are you?" And then there would be a discussion between two of the people, and then there'd be a discussion between the two translators. And then I would get an answer finally, and it would be something like, "Well, I was born during the Buddha's corn festival." And I'd have to ask the question a different way. "Well, how many years do you have?" And it would go through this process again, and then I'd get a response and get, "I'm 238. And it was really a challenge to do these interviews until I really, I had to learn how to ask questions in a way that made sense, and I often did not. And, sit-down interviews were not working, and I was just kind of stumped on what to do. And so I hit on this idea where I was spending so much time traveling between villages and not getting very good interviews that I decided I talked to the major characters and a lot of the people I was interviewing to just come backpacking with me as I traveled around. And so I just interviewed the major sources all day, every day for months. And through that process, I finally started to get a story that came together. And I remember in Pakistan, I grew this long beard because I was in areas where it was illegal to shave. And that way I wouldn't stand out in a crowd. And it was scary at times. When I was in the city, I remember there was this taxi driver, and he was telling me about Daniel Pearl. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's this reporter for the Wall Street Journal who was murdered by terrorists. And the driver said, he wasn't murdered too far from here, but it was his fault that he got murdered. I'm like, wow, really? And he said, yeah. He was Jewish and in Pakistan. I mean, nobody should do that. That would be like being gay and being in Pakistan. And I thought, yeah, terrible idea. I would never do that. In any case, the research took a lot of strange twists. Another time, I remember I was told about, I was taught about the importance of karma, and that if I didn't do certain things, my karma would be really messed up. And so I was trekking to this small village called Hungung, which you can't find any maps, but it takes about 2 weeks from the nearest airstrip, and it's about 2 weeks of hiking to get out there, at least if you're a slow hiker like me. And the people I was with, they told me about this magical substance that I had to eat, or else I was going to have terrible karma. And they said this substance, it's this half plant, half animal. It's called the Himalayan Viagra. It's the secret elixir to life. And if you do not eat this, and you do not share it with us when you get it, you're going to die. We had a German trekker. For some reason, they did not like Germans, and there were lots of stories about bad karma relating to Germans dying. I have no idea why. But I was told, if you do not eat the substance, well, there was a German who did it once, and he was buried by an avalanche. But there was an American who was much like you, and he ate the Yasagumba, the secret elixir to life. And I think his name was Bill Gates. He married a beautiful woman, and he started a big business. And I didn't know what the substance was, and I later learned that it actually really is. It is a half plant, half animal. It's a worm that gets infected by a fungus spore, and it buries itself in the ground, and like this mushroomy thing sprouts out of its head, and the cycle continues. And so we finally got the opportunity to buy this strange worm with mushrooms growing out of its head. And I was convinced I was going to die if I didn't eat it, so I bought some and I shared it with everybody who was with me. And we ate it, and we got so horribly sick. The only thing I had with me was a satellite phone that had about 3 minutes of batteries on it. And so I called my cousin, and she says, "So Peter, let me make sure I understand this." When I call her, she's in San Diego. It's the middle of the night when I call her. She said, "Peter, so you're in a remote village in the Himalaya, and you just got sick because you ate a worm with shrooms growing out of its head. And now you want an evacuation on a helicopter, and the only helicopters you know of are from the Soviet era." And I said yes, and then the phone ran out of batteries. And the people in my group got really, really sick. We called the local healer over because one guy had passed out and was kind of convulsing, and his whole body was shaking around, and it was really, really scary. And so the local doctor came over, and he had this ancient device to take blood pressure, and commenced to tell us he was dead. And I said, "Oh, he doesn't look dead." And the doctor convinced me the only way to bring him back to life was to give him enough money to perform the revival ritual. And anyways, it was like $1.25 in really fancy quarters, so I agreed. We did this. We lit incense, and we played on a drum, and we bowed and made lots of noises. And we went through this whole process to revive the people who were seemingly dead in my group. And we brought him back to life. And we got evacuated on a Soviet-era helicopter that looked like a bus with 2 propellers on top of it. So anyways, the point of telling you that story, besides it being entertaining, is I discovered in doing this research that there's not a conspiracy to hide the story of the Sherpas. Their stories are simply really hard to get. In total, this book took, we researched for about 2 years. We went to Nepal 7 times while we were writing the book, and then actually twice more to fact check it. We took 3 trips to Pakistan. We got unprecedented access to military and government officials, largely thanks to help from the Alpine Club of Pakistan. We interviewed 200 people, actually a lot more than 200 people, but 200 people in detail. We spent countless hours at kitchen tables in France, Holland, Ireland, Italy, Norway, Serbia, Spain, Switzerland, and the United States, and we relied on about 1,000 photographs to put this story together. So it was a huge project. In closing, because I see we're almost out of time, I want to say, that throughout writing the book, I felt this huge responsibility to the characters. Many of them lost family members, and in a way, it's a really horrifying story, and it was a really hard story to write. But in a way, it was also an incredibly inspiring story. I'm writing about people who live rags to riches lives and who become some of the best athletes in the world whom nobody has heard of before. And they pull off some of the most courageous feats I could imagine. And so I'm grateful to my friends and family who have allowed me to see the top of the world. And, without their willingness to help, this book would have been impossible. And my hope is that in reading this book, it does more than inspire and inform you. And I hope that Amanda and I have made a small contribution to the way that we tell stories. And that this story gives you a glimpse into yourself, and it helps you recognize and more deeply appreciate the Sherpas in your life. The book is now out, and it's been about a year, and it's out in about 10 languages, and now it's like the rest of my life is continuing on, and I'm thinking and standing here in front of Chadwick, back to the time when I was with my father, I mentioned earlier, and I told him how miserable I was. And he told me, Peter, if I could take a time machine and bring you, who is here, or show you the version of yourself, 10, 15 years from now, you're going to come back and you're going to see that it all turned out pretty well, and that like the hard times you're going through now will have made it easier for you later. And I remember my dad telling me that and just thinking, no, it's always going to be this hard, and I'm always just going to be struggling so much. And now I feel like you're sitting there and I'm up here, and I feel like I can kind of be the time machine for you, in a sense that not that you're going to end up like me, but that 14 years from now, odds are you're going to be doing something really interesting and totally different from what you necessarily expected, and your life is just, you're going to look back at high school and you're going to think, wow, that was so important to me, how weird. And because I had no idea the person I would be in high school. And I'm not going to say it gets easier, but I feel like you get so much better at dealing with it being hard. And that the skills you're learning now are just going to set you up for the whole future. And you're really, a lot of times you're going to wonder, why are the teachers having me do this, and why are they making it so difficult? But in the end, you're going to look back and you're going to say, oh my God, I'm so glad I went through that, and I'm so amazed at where I've come. So thank you very much. Okay.